Hey, if you're a fan of Led Zeppelin or like Led Zeppelin stories and history, I think you're going to enjoy the video that I have for you here today. What it is I have this old Circus magazine from September 18th of 1979. And this got my attention because this, of course, was published 1 month after In Through the Outdoor and exactly 1 year before John Bonham passed away. And then I saw this headline, after 10 years, Led Zeppelin still leads the pack, a look back and ahead at rock's primal quartet. So anyway, I took a look at this. There's a few really interesting things in here. They talk a little bit about Peter Grant, have some interesting things in there. They describe John Bonham in this article in a way I've never heard him described before, which I think you'll find interesting. And at the very end of the article, they have this little comment about whether or not Led Zeppelin were actually innovators that I think you're going to like hearing. Okay, before we jump into the article, first of all, I have to thank Gary Lighthall. This is one of the magazines that he sent. He sent us a box of magazines we've been going through. We're having so much fun with them. Anyway, Gary, thank you again for sending these things. We're all enjoying them. Also, we want to thank Digitech for their ongoing support of the channel. If you're a guitar player, go to digitech.com. Check out all the latest gear and technology they have there. They always have awesome stuff. We really appreciate their support. And finally, if you are a regular follower of this channel, please stick around to the end of this video because I have a special message for you. Okay, now just to put this in context, this album is In Through the Outdoor. This was put out on August 22nd of 1979. And this was kind of a fascinating album because they'd been kind of missing for a while. And one of the interesting things about this album, if you weren't aware, is that when they put this record out, there were 6 different covers made of this album. And they'd actually shipped it in this paper bag, so you wouldn't necessarily know what cover you were getting. But what they did is on the spine of the record, I don't know if it may not be in focus, but you can see right there's a letter, and on mine, it's a letter C. So there were A, B, C, D, E, F covers. There were 6 different covers of this record, and that's how you'd know which one you had was by that little thing on the spine. And this was something of a controversial record for a lot of people because a lot of people didn't like it. There were so many different things being done on here. I was one of those people that the first time I listened to it, I actually really loved it. In the evening, I don't know what it was about that, but that whole weird sound effects going up to the beginning and the way it punched in, and there was a lot of variety on this record. It was pretty unique. So I actually really enjoyed it the first time I listened to it, and I'd love to get your feedback on what you thought about this record, because having talked about Led Zeppelin a lot on this channel, I know people's response to this record is kind of a mixed bag. So anyway, let's jump into this article. I think you're going to find this, like I said, kind of interesting. They may have been dazed at times, but never confused. Whatever their artistic endeavors, Led Zeppelin have remained loyal to the basic style they began with. And I love this line. Nitroglycerin riffs wrapped around bruised vocals and sonic booms. That's a great description. Unlike artists who seem buffeted by the winds of fashion, Rod Stewart for one, they have become the unlikely champions of commitment in a world of brief musical encounters. Whether it is courageous tenacity or simple stubbornness, it's difficult to argue with success. They came down hard on the music, hard on the cash register keys, and have accumulated the kind of fiscal graffiti, get that little play on words there, that makes accountants weep for joy. Led Zeppelin, like their supergroup cousins, The Who and the Rolling Stones, can look back on careers that span a decade or more. They remain the premier touring band in the world. For example, and this right here kind of blew my mind. They can still sell out Madison Square Garden for 6 nights and have scalpers hawking tickets for $100 a piece. 6 nights, being able to, just the whole idea of being big enough that you could command that kind of an audience, that many nights at Madison, just that whole thought that you'd be able to do that. And then also putting it in context that scalpers selling tickets for $100 a piece, wouldn't that be nice to be able to get tickets for $100 these days? Anyway, the time capsule context of these articles I find so fun. Bill Graham, one of the pioneers of rock promotion and owner of the legendary Fillmore, has had extensive dealings with Led Zeppelin. Some years ago, there was a highly publicized event in which some of Graham's men were beaten in a melee with the Zepp entourage. Graham said, quote, "Because of that deplorable event, I will never allow myself the privilege of working with the band again. But still, I tip my hat to them because they have more personal pulling power than anybody since Mahatma Gandhi. Other groups can outsell them in records and get more radio airplay, but nobody can outdraw them on a concert tour. And by the way, if you ever saw Led Zeppelin, put it down in the comments. I would love to hear your experience seeing them on any of these tours. In the world of music, Led Zeppelin is a shrine before which all serious rock fans must bow sometime in their lives. That is such a great line. Because when you look back at the behemoths of rock, is there really anybody that outshines Led Zeppelin in that way? I love how it said, in the world of music, Led Zeppelin is a shrine before which all serious rock fans must bow sometime in their lives. And unfortunately for so many of us, I know there's a lot of people that watch this channel that are about my age, by the time we became aware of Led Zeppelin, it was too late. We could not go to the shrine, so to speak. We were never going to see them in concert. For me, the next best thing was I got to see Robert Plant on his first solo tour when he was soloing on Principle of Moments. And but it was just something that was, by the time we became of age, it was gone. But boy, going back then, I don't know if you remember this, but when you first discover Led Zeppelin, and you're a teenager, you're a young teen in the early 80s, and somebody introduces you to them, and you hear a whole lot of love for the first time. Oh man, I still remember hearing that and just being blown away. And then you start going back and discovering the library of music that they put out. Man, it was real. Just being able, growing up in the 80s, again, they were already gone, but being able to rewind and go discover these albums, listen to this stuff, and experience Led Zeppelin as a full library all at once was just such a remarkable thing. Okay. And at times the worship is blind. This is so funny. To illustrate the point, Graham tells a story about a young fan who kept pestering him about Led Zeppelin's appearance when rumors were rife about their 1977 American tour. I asked the kid why he was so hot on Zepp and what his favorite albums were. He refused to say anything and just kept repeating, "When is Zepp gonna play, Bill?" Finally, Graham figured out what was happening and asked the kid, "Hey, do you dig the chick in the group?" "Sure, man, she's great. When are they going to be here?" It became apparent that the kid didn't know the group, but knew it was cool to be a Zepp fan. And by the way, do you remember that same thing? I remember when we were kids and people would start talking about Led Zeppelin, we were kind of all discovering it. How many people used to say, "Yeah, Led Zeppelin, he's great." You all remember that. And that was one of those little tests to know whether or not somebody actually knew anything about the band. It was just so great to listen to that. It reminded me that we used to do that, and I thought that was kind of funny. Okay, Scott Muni, program director of the pioneering WNEW FM rock station in New York, echoed Graham's sentiment, saying, "I wish I had the problem of booking Led Zeppelin's concerts and making money with their talent." Led Zeppelin has amazing staying power, said Rosalie Trombley, program director for Detroit's AM heavyweight CKLW. Stairway to Heaven. Now remember, this is 1979. Stairway to Heaven still shows up on our most requested songs list almost every week. I think the hardcore fans respect them because they have never gone commercial. They don't even release their songs as singles. And that is an interesting thing. That was part of their master plan from the beginning, was that they were not going to put out singles. Now, they did a couple of things. Of course, they put out the Immigrant song as a single, and that's where we get, hey, what can I do? Because that was on the flip side of that single. But they really shied away from that. They were an album-oriented group. And if you wanted to buy their stuff, you buy the album. There were no singles being put out. And it was part of their strategy, and it worked. It was kind of amazing looking back at that. And anyway, even these program directors understand where they were coming from in that way. Yet in spite of that kind of clout, the group is hardly known beyond and it actually jumps a couple pages. And in between these pages, I just want to show you some of these pictures. So we have this really super cool picture of Robert Plant right there. And underneath it says, Robert Plant was caftaned, bead-wearing singer for an obscure British group called the Band of Joy before joining Led Zeppelin. I think that is such a cool picture of Robert Plant. The next page over here, these are kind of interesting pictures too, because that right there is Roy Harper. And then, of course, you have Peter Grant, who's their manager, who's kind of notorious. And then the one down here at the bottom, I love this picture. I think this is so cool, looking at Robert Plant and Jimmy Page there. But listen to this. Robert Plant and Jimmy Page take a Jim Beam break on board the Starship Jet en route to the next date on Zepp's 1973 U.S. tour. And that is what they nicknamed the airplane that they took. And it's kind of an interesting story because this is a Boeing 720 that they flew around in on this tour. And the reason they had this is they had been using a smaller plane, but I think it was a flight into Los Angeles once that they had hit so much turbulence, they were like, no more of this plane. We need something that can manage the turbulence a little bit better. And then they got this thing that they nicknamed the Starship. And then this next page here. Okay, this is the thing that I mentioned at the beginning, what they say about Bonham. Of course, we have a really cool picture right there of, I love these pictures, man. Looking at Robert Plant and Jimmy Page when they were young, man. I mean, just look at that picture. That is so cool. That is just so cool. And when Jimmy Page wanted to look cool, he was such a cool looking rock star. I love that guy. Of course, there's John Paul Jones. But then right here, this picture of John Bonham, look what they say about him right here. I really, really love this. And I want to get your feedback on what they say here because I've never heard anybody describe Bonham this way. John Bonzo Bonham has no use for frills. His rock-steady backbeat is marked as much by what he leaves out as what he plays. Now, for me, this is one of the greatest compliments you could give to just about any kind of an artist. It's being able to self-edit. That's probably a good way to put it. It's knowing what to play and what not to play. It's the white space. It's not doing more than you need to. It's doing the things just right. I've never heard Bonham described this way before, but that is the sign of a great artist. And it's really interesting. It was a few days ago, I was here. It was Dave Mustaine. I saw an interview with him. It was just this very short clip. And somebody was asking him about who his favorite guitarists were. And it was funny how he said it because he goes, the guy from Pink Floyd, David Gilmour. You know, he does more with one note than, I don't remember exactly how he said it, but that's such an important thing to think about. And again, it's such a compliment because David Gilmour is one of the greatest examples of what we're talking about here. I mean, go back and listen to the solo in Comfortably Numb. There's no flash, there's no speed, there's none of this showing off like, hey, look how amazing I am. What it is it's perfect. He's a guitar player. He has a moment when the guitar has to be in the spotlight, and he plays the perfect thing that takes the energy of the song from here to here, and he does it just right. I mean, so you take somebody like Gilmour, and that's one of the reasons, I've said this before, I think David Gilmour is one of the greatest guitarists that's ever lived for that reason, because of this whole idea that he knows what to play. He knows how much to play and when to play it. And he sets those things in there so nicely. So to have that compliment here about Bonham, I had just never thought of him that way. You sometimes think of Bonham as this thundering sound, but you don't ever think about him, at least I never have, of yes, but he's also really good at self-editing. Anyway, I'd love to get your feedback on that. Again, it just kind of threw me a little bit to see that, have somebody say that. This next picture, again, Jimmy Page, when he wanted to, looked so cool, and the way he would hold his Les Paul too. I know there are guitarists out there that have attempted to play their guitar the way Jimmy Page is. I remember the first time I ever saw him, because I'm a guitar player. The first time I ever saw him, how low he had that thing. And I remember trying it. Like the next time I picked up my guitar, I got my strap and I stretched that thing all the way down to my knees and I could not play the guitar. And I just kept, and you didn't want to bring it up too high because then you'd look kind of weird until Tom Morello did it in the 90s. And all of a sudden you go, oh, maybe it's cool to do that now. I don't know. Anyway. Okay. Now let's carry on with the article. Okay. Yet in spite of the clout, the group is hardly known beyond the narrow confines of the rock community. And that's an interesting statement because they're just, what they're saying, well, they kind of explain it here. Unlike the Beatles, who were not just a band, but were a social movement, Led Zeppelin seems to have hardly affected the world of fashion or politics. They have, however, inspired the creation of innumerable clones like Kiss. This is such an interesting paragraph. Because when you think about the Beatles, everybody in the world knew who the Beatles were because they didn't just impact music, but just the overall broader culture. They just became part of everything. Where Led Zeppelin, as it says there, if you were in the know, if you were a rock fan, you knew who Led Zeppelin was, but they didn't necessarily branch out into the world at large the way the Beatles did. And there's probably, I think that's probably a pretty accurate assessment. Although their impact on the world of rock over time, especially when you start getting into the 80s, how many bands, how many musicians were inspired by the likes of Jimmy Page and especially Robert Plant? How many Robert Plant clones did we get, after Led Zeppelin was over? I mean, they were everywhere. And in that sense, it kind of impacted the broader culture. But it is an interesting analysis that they didn't have that same kind of broad impact on the world in the same way the Beatles did. But that last line is what really cracks me up. They have, however, inspired the creation of innumerable clones like Kiss. I have never thought of Kiss as a clone of Led Zeppelin. But it is fascinating that again, part of the fun of reading these articles is you have to kind of put it in the context of the time, because this was 1979 and we didn't yet have the nonstop Led Zeppelin clone kind of bands coming, through the 80s yet. So who did we have? Then so they bring up Kiss, because Kiss, of course, was wildly famous at this point. And anyway, I just thought that was kind of a funny little comparison that Kiss is a Led Zeppelin clone. Anyway, I find that fascinating. And I want to hear what you have to say about that, because we have a ton of Kiss fans on this channel and a ton of Led Zeppelin fans, and I'd never made a connection like that, but I'd love to get your feedback. They seem to exist to pleasure their fans with what seem to be the two cardinal virtues of rock and roll: volume and virility. When they perform in concert, even the most diehard fans are bound to get enough preening, posturing, obligatory drum solos, and general eardrum rattling to satisfy them. The four co-pilots of Led Zeppelin have always seemed to know where they wanted to fly and how to get there. Their albums, careers, and even their mistakes have seemed deliberate. From the start, they were not only confident, but brash. For example, who but Misters Plant, Page, Bonham, and Jones would have dared deliver their debut album after a measly 30 hours in the studio? And that is a pretty fascinating story. Jimmy Page had recorded and produced the entire thing before they even approached a record company. And when they went to the record company, this is it, it's done. Take it as it is. It's a fascinating story how they walked in there and made that happen. So, but Jimmy Page had been working in the studio for years, so he knew how to create a really awesome professional product. And of course, you ended up with Led Zeppelin 1, which is just, of course, legendary. So Led Zeppelin began as a creature in the mind of Jimmy Page, who still functions as the band's musical director. The beast took shape and arose from the ashes of the Yardbirds. Page was a member, who split up in 1968. Page, who sacrificed a profitable life as a studio musician to join the Yardbirds, decided he wanted to maintain the momentum and began shopping around for colleagues after the dissolution. He collared John Paul Jones, an old friend from his studio days, to play bass. The first draft choice for vocalist was Terry Reid. Every time I hear that, I think how different the world would be if Terry Reid had taken him up on that. Just fascinating thinking about that. Who declined in favor of a budding solo career. Finally, Page checked out Plant, a wiry, blonde performer who wore kaftans and sang bluesy rock for the Band of Joy. It's kind of a hippie type. The next choice was Plant's drummer friend from the Band of Joy, John Bonham. And so the group was born. When the four musical elements that constitute Led Zeppelin coalesced, the catalyst that melded them together came from a non-musical man who looked like a Japanese sumo wrestler. His name was Peter Grant, a former bouncer, sheet metal worker, and stagehand who became the impresario who mapped the strategy for giving Led Zeppelin a fate different from the Hindenburg. And if you want to understand just how important Peter Grant was to this group, all you have to do is go back and look at Song Remains the Same, the movie. Because you remember they had those four fantasy pieces in the movie, one for each member of the band. But they also gave a fantasy piece to Peter Grant. Remember, I think it was at the beginning of it. He was a mobster, and there was that funny part where he like shot a guy's head off, and then the blood or whatever it was started shooting out, and it looked so fake that it was awesome. It was so amazing. I remember watching that as a kid, like, what? And then you just remember it just because it was so ridiculous. Anyway, but he was so important. Grant is the one who, during Zepp's first American tour, called ahead and found out which cuts were hot in what city and would alter the band's set to emphasize those songs in concert. They were fan pleasers from the beginning. I don't know. I don't remember ever hearing that. Maybe I knew that before and just don't remember it. I don't remember that. But that's an interesting little twist also into all the kind of interesting things that Led Zeppelin was doing back then that were different than everybody else. I mean, think about that. He's calling to these different, I don't know, maybe other people are doing it. I just never heard of this before, where you're getting a hold of cities that you're going to and saying, hey, what are the big songs? What are our big songs there? And let's take the set list and finesse it and change it for that purpose. Today, you would rarely see something like this because so many bands, so many concerts they're so structured. They're not going to go off script. Everything is organized. I tell you, there's one band that surprised me that they didn't follow the structure, and it was Soundgarden. If you ever saw Soundgarden, I don't think they played the same set ever. You'd see them one night to another. They were just whatever song, and they were great that way. It's cool when a band can do that. When they have the ability to be flexible and not stick to the game plan, just go with it. Pick the things that people want to hear, or pick the things that you're particularly in the mood for, that the setting is right for, or whatever, and just play. Anyway, that was kind of a cool thing I didn't know. I'd never heard that, or if I did, I don't remember it, about Peter Grant. Part of Grant's plan included the creation of a mystique about the group, using the approach of Elvis mentor Colonel Tom Parker. Grant has kept press hounds at bay, and members of the group rarely give interviews. Now, this also is pretty fascinating. Understanding the psychology of a rock band like this, or just understanding psychology in general. If you overexpose yourself, people get tired of you. And so he understood the importance of mystique in that sense. He goes, look, we're not going to put you out in front of people constantly. You're going to go to a concert. You have these limited photos, that are, because even the album covers, I mean, just look at Led Zeppelin 1. You had actually really good pictures of them on Led Zeppelin 1, but you get to 2 and it's kind of, the way they posterize the graphic, it's kind of hard to tell what they look like. And you get to Led Zeppelin 3, again, kind of posterized photos that looked really cool, but not a lot there to get out of it. Led Zeppelin 4, nothing. They didn't even write on the cover who the band is. And you just go down the list, and they were very good about kind of keeping the mystique that way. And from a psychological standpoint, then people become more fascinated with you. And this is an interesting, getting back to that parallel with Kiss, because one of the things that Bill Aucoin, who was Kiss's manager, understood was that very thing. Because it was his idea to, hey guys, you're never going to be seen in public without your makeup because of mystique. We don't want, and then of course, what is it? Then everybody's interested. What do they look like? I remember I had the album Double Platinum, you might have had that, where it had the embossed graphics of all of them. And my master plan in life was I was going to take some paper with a pencil right over the embossing and then erase all the lines around the makeup. So I would be the one person who knew what they looked like. Anyway, it's so silly looking back on that now. But where Kiss didn't do this correctly, they had the mystique with the makeup, but on the other hand, they overexposed the characters with the makeup. So unlike Led Zeppelin, who had this long career, here they are in 1979, and they're still the biggest thing in the world, Kiss shows up in what are they showing up in 1974? And by 1979, people are getting tired of them. 5 years. And part of the reason was, yes, they did the mystique with the makeup, but when you start slapping your face on lunch boxes and t-shirts and belt buckles and everything, then finally you just go, whoa, 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 whoa. You have the mystique with the makeup, but we're kind of sick of it. And then, that was the trap that they fell into, where Zeppelin never really had that, fell into that trap. Anyway, just kind of interesting looking at that. Okay, Jimmy Page, 35. Grew up in England, went to art school at Croydon and learned guitar copying licks by James Burton on Ricky Nelson albums. Soon he was playing sessions for artists such as The Who, I Can't Explain, My Generation, Them, Gloria, Donovan, The Rolling Stones, and Tom Jones. Because of health problems, he turned down the chance to replace Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds, but later joined the band in 1966. And by the way, I know a lot of people already know this, but if you don't know a lot about Led Zeppelin, that, because he was a studio musician and played on so many, popular songs, and had so much experience in the studio, that's why he was able to produce Led Zeppelin. That's why he was able to record that first album and just do it himself, because he had learned how to make an album. He'd been looking over the shoulder of producers for years. So he understood the studio. He understood how to get sounds. He understood how to mix. He understood all of it because he'd been working in that field for a while. Anyway, I know a lot of people already know that, but if you didn't, that's kind of an important thing. I just didn't want to just brush past that. That is where he cut his teeth and why he was able to do what he did. Let's see here. Eric Clapton in the Yardbirds, later joined the band in 1966. Page's general interests seem to be as eclectic as his musical tastes. He has displayed a prevailing preoccupation with the mystical and occult. He even owns the notorious Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland, where English warlock mystic Aleister Crowley lived for many years. Robert Anthony Plant was born in 1948 from Bromwich, Staffordshire. He shares much of Page's interests in mythology and the mystical. Plant is married, though he has referred to himself as a, quote, self-satisfied carnal gourmet. He broke his leg during their 1975 tour in an auto accident. Another tragedy befell him when his 5-year-old son, Carrick, died of a viral infection. And by the way, one of the most famous songs off of this album was the song All of My Love, which is a beautiful song. And it was written in kind of commemoration of his son, Carrick, who had passed away. Beautiful, beautiful piece of music. Both Bonham and John Paul Jones, Bonham 30, John Paul Jones 33, were born in England and seemed content with the realities of this world and simple pleasures of conspicuous consumption. Grant has also been a psychological and physical shield for the group against the outside world. And I thought this was kind of interesting too. One legendary story is that Plant was being harassed in an airport by a group of sailors about his long hair. Just at the critical moment, Grant appeared and lifted one of the assailants off the ground, saying, "What's your effing game, Popeye?" And when you see pictures of Peter Grant, he was a moose of a man. He was a wall. And so he was great that way. Not only did he kind of understand how to push the group and knew what to do with them from a, positioning, marketing standpoint, he was a monster and was a protector of these guys. Anyway, I love hearing little stories like that. Although the members of Led Zeppelin have shown their willingness to dabble with a variety of musical genres, they have never been innovators. And this is where I really want to hear your feedback. When I read that, of course, my Led Zeppelin defensive shields went up and go, "Never innovators. What in the world are you talking about?" But this really isn't the first time people have said this kind of thing, because when you go back to the early days of Led Zeppelin, a lot of people, even though they were masters at creating music, were just saying all they're really doing is just borrowing a bunch of old blues standards. And they're just kind of repackaging them their own way. And by the way, I got this out because I knew we'd be talking about it. In case you didn't, and again, a lot of people already know this stuff, but two of the songs on Led Zeppelin 1 came from this guy. And they're right here. I Can't Quit You, Baby, and You Shook Me, Willie Dixon. And if you look at, the album, it has his name right under the song that he's the one that created. So you have two songs on that first album that are just borrowed from old blues standards, from Willie Dixon. And then you kind of you start moving forward in their career, and a lot of people criticize them for that. Different songs that they had really kind of stolen from other people, and in some cases didn't even really give them credit for it. And so there is something to be said for they weren't innovators, but here's where again I have to check myself, because then I start processing all this stuff, thinking about it. And I want to get your feedback on this, because you look at something like, let's go to Led Zeppelin 3. Prior to Led Zeppelin 3, Had there ever really been a song like the Immigrant Song? To me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, and somebody could point something out. To me, that is, even though it's like 2.5 minutes, very short piece of music, that is an amazingly unique, innovative piece of music. And it's one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs, I think, for a lot of people. I mean, that one ended up in School of Rock because it is such a classic. It's such an amazing piece of piece of music. Innovative. And then you move forward to Led Zeppelin 4, and I know it's so obvious throwing something like this out, but Stairway to Heaven. You know, the way they increase the tempo increased slightly, and it took you on this journey where it started off in this acoustic, and then it built up and built up and built up, and then it exploded. You know, and you had the way the solo, but even the acoustic stuff and the use of the mellotron. And mellotron wasn't new, I know, but they brought all these things together, and that's kind of a singularly unique piece of music, and in my opinion, kind of innovative. I mean, nobody's perfectly innovative. Everybody borrows. Everybody's ever written a song got the concepts and the formula and the organization from somewhere else. But so let's fast forward just a little bit more, and you get into things like, you know, No Quarter from Houses of the Holy. Is that not kind of innovative? Kind of the way, I don't know. I think that one has kind of some unique stuff. And then maybe the one that for me the most obvious is probably off of Physical Graffiti with Kashmir. Maybe their greatest song ever. Now I know they're borrowing Middle Eastern kind of modes and things there, but is that not innovative? I mean, think of how many people through the past that borrowed from them that kind of sound built on the idea of Kashmir. You'd hear that for years, probably still hearing bands coming out with that kind of stuff. So, and then, you know, even one more on Presence. And this is, for a lot of people, their favorite Led Zeppelin song of all, Achilles' Last Stand. Now, to me, when I listen to that song, it actually sounds unfinished, but there's no doubt, there's no arguing that it's kind of a brilliant piece of music. So, is that not innovative? Anyway, I heard that word, and I know why Led Zeppelin started out that way, where people thought they weren't innovative. But to get to that point here seemed, like I said, my Led Zeppelin defense shield kind of went up when I read that again. I thought, I don't know if I completely agree with that. I'd love to get your feedback on this. Okay, but a pioneering spirit isn't a prerequisite of success in rock and roll. Elvis, after all, wasn't the first to do what he did, but he was the best. So it is with Led Zeppelin. And by the way, if I've never talked about this before, I'm pretty sure I have. I love Elvis. And when it says he's the best, he was the best at what he did. No question about it. And if you don't understand that, I want to encourage you to do something. I want to encourage you to go find I think it was 1968 Elvis comeback special. The part where he's sitting on that little stage, that little square stage, I think it's like 10 by 10 feet, might even be smaller than that. And just watch that dude in that black leather when he's sitting with his band. He's got an acoustic guitar that he's playing. He knew how to play the guitar, and he's got his little band sitting around him. Just watch the charisma dripping off of Elvis Presley. If you've ever wondered what made him the greatest, why he was the king of rock and roll, just watch that. The way he smiles, the way he talks to the audience, the way he moves, the way he sings, the way he attacks his instrument, the way he sits, everything about him just drips cool. And for me personally, every once in a while, just for no reason, just in the middle of the day, I'm like, dang, I got to watch that Elvis special. I will find it on YouTube and I will just sit and watch it. And it's one of those things where I like smile to the point I start laughing because it's just so cool. Anyway, get you a little view into my brain. I love that stuff. So anyway, when it said that right there, I'm like, yes, thank you very much. But I don't know that Elvis really ever wrote a song. You know, I mean, especially when you get into the later parts of his career, he was just doing standards kind of, and he was getting, let's be honest, it was getting a little lazy by the time he got to the end of his career. But you find when he was at his prime, nobody could touch him. He was amazing. So anyway, I thought that was fun seeing that. Okay, besides their chemistry as a band, they have a knack for knowing what to borrow and from whom. Here. Exactly, that's true. They have always been synthesizers. I love the fact that they use that word that way in 1979. Their only vice in the process is an unwillingness to give credit where credit is due. And again, that was something of an issue. Even to this day, people will still go, I love Led Zeppelin, but yeah, they were borrowing things and stealing things, and they were not really giving the credit that they should have for the stuff that they used. Their early works are full of secondhand ideas culled from the Yardbirds, Jeff Beck, American Blues, and other sources. Yeah, just like we said just a second ago. No question about that. Even their forte was merely the hot style of the era. Heavy metal. Oh, we've talked about this on this channel so much that term gets used, and here they are using it in 1979. But with their hand-me-down patchwork of ideas, they have been able to spin gold and platinum. All right, I told you at the beginning of the video that I'd have a message at the end. So if you're still here, first of all, thank you. We've been working on this channel and building this community for well over a year now, and I genuinely appreciate you being a part of it. I'm having an absolute blast doing this, and it's turning into something really special. And the feedback, the comments, emails, messages, and all of your kind words have meant more to me than you probably realize. This has been an amazing journey over the last year. Now, that said, I'm at a point where there are a lot of things that need more attention if this community is going to move to the next level, and I'm running up against my own limitations. There's only so much I can do solo. And I do have a producer who I hired who helps with some of the shows and around the studio, but beyond that, I'm bootstrapping this entire thing. We still have clients, projects, and other work that keeps the lights on, studio rent, payroll, utilities, insurance, all that stuff. And I'm not sharing this for sympathy at all. I am a very, very blessed person. I'm sharing this because I'm looking for people who can see the vision and want to help this thing grow into something bigger and more self-sustaining. Now, even though the channel does bring in a little income from the YouTube Partner Program, we've never made a profit on it. Most of what supports this channel comes from other work I'm doing outside of it. But watching the growth here has given me a really clear vision of what this could become for all of us. Yes, we're reminiscing, but we're also preserving history. But even more than that, we're building a community. And in just 1 year, we've grown this channel tenfold. And there's no reason we can't do that again. And I can envision someday online events, a big meetup in Vegas maybe, and who knows, maybe even an annual Audio Mover cruise where we can all get together as a group of people who get it, if you know what I mean. But to build that kind of community, I just need help. And watching the videos, commenting, sharing feedback will always be appreciated. But if you want to be more involved in that, well, this is my invitation. I have some specific things I could use help with, and I know there are a lot of people watching right now with skills, ideas, and talents that could help this community grow in ways that I haven't even thought of yet. So if you're excited about this journey, if you can see the vision of what we're building here and want to be more involved than just watching and commenting, I would honestly be honored to have your help. Now, you can email me directly at audiomover@gmail.com and let's talk. And just so everything is clear, this is a labor of love. There's no budget for this. I'm asking for volunteers purely out of passion. And if you believe in what we're building, I'd love to have you on board. Anyway, thanks for taking the time to visit with me today. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.